Hello, everybody. Our next talk will be from John and Daniel, and they will talk about the AI powered developer. So it sounds very interesting. And, gentlemen, if you are ready, I'm leaving the stage to you.
Thank you. Yes, as said, we're John. I'm John. This is
I'm
Dan.
Daniel.
And we work at CodeCentric AG, which is a IT consultancy based. We're based in Frankfurt in Germany.
So there are hundreds of news messages coming around every day about AI, new AI tools, new AI models, new AI everything. And some even say in a few years we won't have to do any programming anymore. And reading all about this, I get a little scared. And I think most of us get a little scared. How will our job look like in a couple of years? Will we have a job in a couple of years? And so, with this in mind, we started to play around a little bit.
I think the first thing that anybody does is they open up ChatGPT and they type something like this in, and you get it's a bit of a surprise the first time. Wow, that's a pretty decent answer. And I think ChatGPT, it's pretty good for a question like this. It's online. You can stick in some public data. There's nothing private there, and it's pretty handy. And you start using that, you get a bit of help. But after a while, you realize there are also some limits to what it can do. So I think that your fear, your worries changes a little bit. It's not like I'm not going to be replaced by AI. I don't think an AI is going to be able to do everything that a programmer can do, at least not in the foreseeable future. But one does see, hey, this is going to change the way we work.
Yeah. And if anybody replaces us, it's somebody that is supported by AI. And so we can see AI makes us faster and it can support us in our daily life. So maybe we should choose as fast.
That's right. It's definitely not a fad like blockchain where we don't know what's going to happen. It has already changed the way we work for some of us. And so this option to say, well, maybe I'll stick my head into the sand and hope that everything kind of just goes away and that the fad disappears is maybe not such a good option anymore. Nevertheless, we're confronted with a choice.
Yes, we can do exactly this, take the red pill and forget everything we have seen. Maybe you have maybe you have tried out some prompts into ChatGPT and you weren't pleased by the results. And then you just leave it behind, don't think about it anymore. Or, however, we could take the blue pill and dig deep down the rabbit hole and find out how AI can help us actually to get better and to get faster. And John and I decided to take this pill, and this is why we are standing here today. And we will show you what we have just learned on our journey.
So Daniel put together a few use cases when he'd used ChatGPT in the last week or an AI for various different tasks. And what I found stunning about these use cases is that I looked at it and said, I didn't use it for any of those things. I used it for all these other things. And that just showed to me that there are so many potential use cases for AI if you start thinking in that direction.
But I think that's a lie. We have one use case we both used, which are birth cards. Some of our colleagues got new babies recently, and then you have to do this socially awkward thing and write cards for them. And AI can be very, very helpful in doing so.
That's right. When you're an emotionally challenged developer, you need this kind of help. It's fantastic. But if you're going to start just chucking stuff into ChatGPT over the web, like we just saw, there are a few things you're going to need to think about.
The first one you need to know is that all data you input is used for training by default, which means if you put in some business secrets, it might be shown to another user at some point in future. And it's important to opt out for these features if you plan to put in any secrets into the AI.
You can Google and you'll find, you can search and you'll find where you can ask the AI and you'll find a form where you can do that for OpenAI, for ChatGPT. If you happen to get a result in one of your responses from ChatGPT about Samsung and internal Samsung meeting data, that's because Samsung employees didn't do that and they put some data into the LLM, and that was a big news item about a year or two ago.
And another big thing which is obvious, but we need to know we don't control the servers. They are hosted by Microsoft in the United States, and it's not our service. So we should be careful what data we send to them.
But what if we don't want our data to leave Europe, in our case? We want to have a bit more control. We want to have, as a company wants to have maybe a contract with the provider and not just users wildly creating accounts and sticking stuff in there.
Yeah, then we have the possibility to use Microsoft Azure OpenAI. We can just spawn a service, basically a server in Paris will provide us with basically the same results we get from the web ChatGPT. But we have a special contract with Microsoft, which has a little stricter data protection policies than ChatGPT would have, and the data don't leave the European Union.
That's right. So this is actually one from our code-centric private ChatGPT for OpenAI service that we're using in the company. A lot of companies are going in this direction now to get some control over it. As code-centric, we actually are setting that up at the moment for various companies. So we do that work. There are various open source tools which you can use to provide this UI and do the grunt work for you. Here's an example where it's a real example. I wanted to get some code generated for something, and I wanted to put some customer data in, but I still not allowed to give my customer data to Azure in Paris. So I changed a few IDs and a few things so it felt a bit comfortable. And then I was comfortable using that service for that issue, for that thing.
We are working at Codecentric, and our company put out a new a new AI policy, how we are allowed to use cloud. And basically they are saying we are only allowed to use it for test purposes, and by no means we are allowed to put in any business secrets or personal data, which seems fair so far. However, we have just learned that we get faster when we use AI, that AI might be the new state of art for working, for development. And now our company wants to hold us back, wants us to be less efficient.
At the same time, we're trying to be state of the art, cutting edge, technology leader. That's kind of our pitch. That's what we want to be in Codecentric. So we had a bit of a problem. What did we do? Well, one Friday night, we stayed back a bit later, and we had two questions in our minds. The first question was actually, hey, Daniel wrote a test for applicants that want to come and work at Codecentric. They have to do a programming test with us. I said, Daniel, what if somebody comes and just puts that into an AI and says, here's the answer, finished. Should we tell that person, no, sorry, no AI, you've got to do it properly? Should we congratulate the person? Well done. That's the right way to solve a problem these days. We were a bit confused. So we kind of asked ourselves, does it even work? So we sat there trying to work out, can I solve his programming question with AI? And at the same time,
we tried out to do it with offline AI solutions. So solutions that works on our machine. We thought we have quite heavy hardware, we have good laptops, and they should be able to run at least some AI offline on our devices. And so the night was getting late. You can see it's getting dark outside, and we have opened the first bottle of wine and tried out different tools, which allows us to work locally on our machine.
That's right. So the good news is there is something like ChatGPT on localhost. Now, we're using that term a bit broadly. What we really mean is an LLM, or a large language model. ChatGPT is a large language model, an LLM. And what basically happens is OpenAI grabbed a lot of input data, did some kind of processing on that data, and then they end up with this machine, right, where they can put input in and put prompts in and get results out. And that's the large language model which they've created, and that's what they're hosting in America. But other people have gone and done the same kind of work and released their work as open source. So there are open source large language models out there, and you can download these large language models so that same processing happens on your local machine without sending any data anywhere. So with running these open source models locally, no data needs to leave your machine at all.
Yeah, the first tool we want to show you is Ollama, which is basically a one-time for these LLM, for just those models John mentions. And I think you can jump right into the demo and show us how Ollama works.
Yes. First, I'll just list out the LLMs that I've got. So Ollama is like a framework, let's call it. It's hosting. It's a tool to host LLMs. It doesn't actually do any, it's not an LLM itself, and you can download them. I've downloaded these ones, and now I'm going to say run serve. What is it? Run Llama.
But you have a typo in Ollama.
Ah, that's right. I'm wondering why I wasn't getting the auto completion. There we go. So I'm going to run Llama 3 8B. And I'm going to ask it to, I'm just going to copy a prompt.
You see above the model, Llama 3 is actually about 5 gigabytes large, so a rather small model actually.
So it runs actually lightning fast, this particular model. On my machine, I'm running a pretty modern MacBook. It's an M2. It's a decent MacBook. And that will probably, you have to play around. You can play around with different models. But let's have a look and see. First of all, we've got some pretty good results there from the LLM. And
yeah, we see it's plain Python and it looks wild, but maybe we can use a library. And there's one library called Pandas, which is great for using with tables. So maybe we just ask the AI to use Pandas as libraries.
What I'd like to point out is it knows what we're talking about. It's got the context of the discussion. In case you've ever wondered with any of these LLMs how that works, the LLM is actually stateless. It actually has no context in itself, but every time you send a prompt, it sends the previous prompts with it. So whatever's in your window, it'll send again and say, you said this, the LLM said this, you said this, the LLM said this, and the LLM uses that to understand the context. So that's how that works. Another interesting thing, I'll just start this again so that we've got so it doesn't have the context anymore. Now, a lot of people are saying please and thank you with LLMs. I don't really know why. You can do that if you want, but you can also just say, instead of write a Python script which parses CSV, you can just write Python parse CSV, columns, product, price, output, cheapest product. You can put something like that in, and you still get a pretty darn good answer. So for me, it's a bit of a game to try and see how succinct I can be with LLMs and still get the answer I want, because less typing, better, I reckon.
It's basically like Googling. You don't put a whole sentence into Google, you reduce it to just the keywords you need. And it most often works on LLMs as well, not only on local LLMs, but also on something like ChatGPT.
I think that's a hint really towards something which we weren't going to go into in depth now, but prompt engineering. It's a whole game in itself, and not everything works the way you would think it would work. And so it's really about playing around with things. We'll talk a little bit about that later. But if you go to the Ollama website, you'll be confronted by a massive list of models. I mean, everybody's taken another model and just changed it a little bit. It's like Linux distributions, you know? So which one should you use?
Yeah, there's actually quite a lot of models, and each big tech company has their own model. So Facebook has Llama, we have just seen. Microsoft has Phi, and Google has Gamma as their open source model. And we want to give you an opinionated selection, which we think works best on different use cases. The first recommendation from us is Mixtwell 8B. First
8 times 7B.
8 times 7B.
Which is like 56B.
That's important because the number after the column is the size of the model in billion parameters. And the larger the number, the better the results from the model, but the slower it runs on your device. ChatGPT has something around 200 billion parameters, so that's a lot less, but it still works quite good on your local machine. However, 8 times 7B is still hungry, needs really good hardware, and I think on most machines, Llama 3 8B, which we have just seen used by John, works very well, works really good, and was just released a few months ago.
Yeah, or less. And this is one of the problems about running a talk, holding a talk about AI. Don't ever do that, by the way. You have to continually update the thing, because every week there's a new model or a new thing coming out, and this, we just updated it the other day to change from our previous recommendation. Yep, that's really quite an impressive model.
So to summarize what we have just seen, we have seen ChatGPT as the software as a service solution model. And if your employer or your customer allows it, always use a software as a service solution. It just works best, and it's our recommendation to use. Remember to opt out for training. Then we have seen on the right-hand side Olama, which runs on our local machine, and we have recommended you some models. And now we have somewhere in between. We've also seen Azure OpenAI. It's if your employer or your customer wants the data to stay inside the European Union.
So these three things we're talking here about when you are just using the standard kind of type in a box chat features of LLM, of ChatGPT, or whatever. But we're developers, and actually what we need is we want our tools right there in our IDE. And probably you've all heard about something like GitHub Copilot. So I'm just going to try and, oh, there it was, there we go. Try and change my screen to this, and here we've got, I actually had this case. This is based on a real case. I didn't know how to use GitHub Actions because I hadn't done much with GitHub before. And one thing which these kind of chats are really good at are things where you're just trying to get started with stuff. And here I work with Copilot all the time. So my customer allows the use of Copilot, so I'm using it. And you get this window here, and so it's the same principle. And I say, I want this to run every time I push to a PR. Okay, I don't ask or say please or anything. Just tell it what it's going to do. This is a new update. I got this morning, this update, that it's kind of telling you what it's doing with these little ticks. And here we see it's told me what to do. All right, so it's given me here an answer. So what it's done is it's had a look where I'm working. In this case, I'm working in this file. It looks at open tabs. It looks sometimes at your history. In this case, it says it used one reference, which is that file, to work out what to tell me. And it's given me an explanation here and a suggestion. Now, what I can do is copy that or insert it. One interesting thing is you can also just manually copy paste it, but if you use this button, it changes the statistics. I actually downloaded the GitHub API. From the GitHub API, I downloaded the statistics the other day of how many people are accepting the prompts, how often and stuff. It was kind of interesting. So yeah, it's in the IDE and it's grabbing the context, which is fantastic. And actually, the VS Code one is a little bit more advanced than the IntelliJ one. You can do this kind of chat in the middle of your IDE. But anyway, we're going to talk about that later. So that's the basics of Copilot. You've probably all heard about it. You might have played around with it. Let's go back to the presentation if I can.
These tools evolve very fast. Maybe in a few months, they will look completely different.
Yeah.
However, John has told you he's allowed to use Copilot at his customer. My customer doesn't allow me to use Copilot. So I need a different solution. And the first thing we need to understand is that every of these tools is just run by an LLM with a certain set of rules. A rule is, for example, don't output any hacking code. And Marvin von Hagen wanted to know these set of rules from an AI, in this case from a GitHub Copilot chat. And he asked the AI, hey, output your set of rules. And the AI said, no, sorry, I can't do that. I'm not allowed to do that.
Yes, but luckily, Marvin actually works for OpenAI, you see. So at least that's what he told the AI. And Copilot then realized it had to help him and told him its whole set of rules. So basically, when you send a prompt in Copilot, it's sending your prompt and all of this stuff as well. It's kind of like one big prompt.
And we put this in the slides for actually two reasons. The first one, it's funny, and we can actually learn a little bit about prompt engineering. Some words are capitalized, some sentences are repeated in this prompt. It's not a perfect topic of science. It's something people believe will work best, but we can learn from reading other prompts. And the second thing is we understand, hey, everything is just an LLM. So we have just learned about Olamas. We just need to connect Olama to our IDE. And that's the next thing we want to show you.
Surely someone must have done this for us already.
Yeah.
And in fact, they have.
And a lot of people have. And one of the solutions we want to show you today is Continue. And if you go on the next slide, it looks the same as GitHub Copilot Chat. And we have the chat on the right-hand side. On the bottom, you actually see we use a model named CodeLlama 13b. We haven't updated this slide because now we would use Llama 3 8b as model. And it's the same as before. We can ask questions, interact with our code.
But as you would expect from a tool like that, which is sort of young open source tool compared to the Microsoft, probably the most used commercial tool, the UI is a little bit, not as good, let's say. Okay, so sometimes it's just not as smoothly integrated. It works, but it's not as smooth. You can see an example. I won't even say it, but you can see that. So it works. It's slightly different. You'll find they're all a little bit different. In this particular one, you add the context manually. There's a button down there above where you type in the prompt where you can add the context, or you can type an @ button, which gives you control over what context you give. It's an interesting side to it.
Yeah, there are lots of tools, like I mentioned. Why did we choose Continue Dev? I think they have 3 very interesting features. The first of all is you can connect them with a lot of different backends. For example, you can just use Azure OpenAI as a backend for Olama. The second interesting feature is you are not limited only to your code, but you can also include other context providers, like, for example, GitHub issues, and say, hey, here's GitHub issue 8910, and please solve this issue with this code. And last but not least, we have the feature called code-based retrieval. And that's actually really interesting because that answers the question, which files are relevant to answer your question in the chat. And the LLM can't just put your whole project files into the chat. It needs to select the most important file. That's what we have seen with GitHub Copilot Chat just before in the demonstration. And Continue Dev is one of the few tools that has this feature integrated. It doesn't work very well, but it's a really promising feature, and I love to see it improve in the future.
Alternatively, if you're running, that will work on VS Code and on IntelliJ. I found on IntelliJ, at least last time I used it, that it was pretty buggy. Yeah, so buggy that I said, this is not the best solution. But luckily on IntelliJ, there is a tool which only works on IntelliJ called CodeGPT. They all have kind of similarly confusing names, but this is just an open source tool. And interestingly, in this tool, you have the models integrated. So with Continue, you actually start the local model with Olama like we just did, and then tell it, use that thing on the way we did on the terminal. You start and say, use that. Whereas this one, you say, download the model here and start server. You see where we've highlighted in red. It's all integrated. And so it's kind of like less work in a certain way, or it's easier maybe to get started. And that offers similar, slightly different, but basically the same concept, and also works quite nicely. So summarizing,
we have seen GitHub Copilot Chat, and as before, we always recommend a software as a service solution. So if your customer or if your employer allows it, use GitHub Copilot Chat or a similar solution. So if your code is hosted on GitLab anyhow, you could also use GitLab Duo, which is the equivalent of GitHub Copilot Chat from GitLab, or any other software as a service solution, basically. Then on the right-hand side, we have seen the local AI tools, Continue Dev and CodeGPT, and we recommend using the same models as we did with Olama. And then there's something in between, John.
Yes, and the question is, what if your employer or customer says, hey, we want our data, we want software as a service, but we want our data to stay in Europe. I looked around and said, who is hosting stuff in Europe? And I couldn't find any kind of mature, good solution being hosted in Europe last time I checked. Might have changed yesterday. But what most of them will tell you, for example, Codium, or the JetBrains AI solution, they'll say, we will host you can host it yourself in Europe. Sorry, they say, do self-hosting. So if you want to self-host, there's a bunch of options there. But I talked to Tab9, and Tab9 is a company that's been around for a while. They've got a mature solution along the same lines, and they said they'll do SaaS in Europe if you are interested. If they've got customers interested, they would actually host the SaaS in Europe for you. So that's another option. Tab9, by the way, has got investments from Atlassian, so they're also building integration. They've actually built integration with the AI integration in Atlassian products now. Yeah.
To be honest, all these companies offer you premium support if you are a premium customer, and will help you self-host the service inside the European Union.
Yeah. Alrighty.
So we have another step. We have seen a chat interface in our IDE, but maybe we want a step further. We want to integrate the IDE features into our code base itself. And John and I, we were on a hackathon, which has the topic AI and AI tooling for programmers, and we tried out a lot of different toolings. And we got home and we were both amazed by the in-IDE chat. Mm-hmm. It was amazing. It was mind-blowing how good this was and how much it helped us. However, we were really disappointed about the in-IDE features. So basically a code suggestion, we write a word and the rest of the sentence or the next few lines will be auto-generated. And then I tried it out on my production project, and I found some pretty good use cases. I didn't expect it to help me. And I want to talk about the top 3 use cases I found right now. The first one is data mappers. In my opinion, one of the unsolved problems in computer science is data mapping. We have a domain, we have an entity, we have a DTO, and we need to map between all of these objects. And in here, you can see my cursor is at line 15, right at the closing bracket. And the AI auto-successes the next, 10 lines, which is the data mapper I just want to write. It's not perfect, like the URL need to be mapped a little differently. However, if I press the tab key, I will have a good skeleton I can use to work on. The same applies to libraries. If I use a new library, of course, I need to look up at the documentation, which properties are required for this library to work. However, I can just write down the builder name like I did here, and the next few lines are a really good suggestion of what I want to configure. And I think in this example, it's actually perfect and it fitted my use case precisely. And the last one I want to talk about are log and exception messages. So if I need some more observability in my code and I put down logger statements at some points, it's amazing how good the AI can predict the text I want to log. And the same applies to exception messages. I just need to write down the condition, and most of the time the exception message and the message text itself is quite good when outputted.
But not everything is good.
Not everything is good, right? Don't expect too much from these features, because if you have a complex function like ensure every opening HTML tag has a closing one, we can easily see this task cannot be solved by a simple replace or by a simple regex. And this is the main learning. The AI will help you when you do stupid tasks like data mapping or like exception messages, but it won't write your complete business logic, and it won't write the complex parts and actually the interesting parts of your code and of your code base.
By the way, I just noticed that's our camera, so we have to stay inside that frame.
Okay.
Slight organizational announcement. Now, we are talking about, before we were talking about a chat window where when we want something from the AI, we type something in and say, give me an answer now. And unless you're typing in that chat window and asking for an answer, the AI is not doing anything or not taking your data. But now we're talking about inline suggestions where I'm typing something and the AI is continually suggesting the next thing, a little bit like when I press Control Space in an editor, but it's continually suggesting what I might want. And in order to continually be suggesting what I want, it needs to continually be receiving data. So I'm continually uploading the files I'm working on and the context, right? So think about that for a second. If you turn that feature on, and you open a file like this prod.dbdump.sql in your editor, or perhaps these other green files there, my env.prod with perhaps my environment variables in my secure keys and other passwords in it, then just having them in your IDE with one of those features turned on could mean that that data is being sent to the AI, or would, if you open it, it'll certainly be sent there. And that's something you need to consider depending on what kind of solution you're using and where that is. Am I really wanting to send, actually, as soon as you send a key or something somewhere else, even though the provider says we throw it away straight away, which they don't all do, but some do, then even if they say that, theoretically your security is broken as soon as you've sent that to anybody else.
And that's especially important if you see this talk, you run home and you say, yeah, I've learned a lot about tools and plugins. I will install all of them and I will try them out. And do it, really do it, try out, learn things. But please remember to turn these tools off if you use your customers' or employers' code once again, and if you are not allowed to use these tools.
That's right, because you open and you enable the plugin with your demo project, and then you close the demo project, come back the next day and open your customer project or your employer project, forget that you've still got the tool enabled. So summarizing, if we're now talking about inline code completion, then we've got a few different solutions. Again, we've got GitHub or similar, whichever provider you have, the Google, the Google Scott solution and so forth. So you can use them. Or if you're on the local machine, we've got a different tool for that. It's called Tabby AI that we recommend. And that's one that really prioritizes fast answers. Like we've got smaller, you see the 1 and 7B models are smaller than the ones we recommended elsewhere, because our experience, or rather Daniel's experience, is that you want fast answers.
Right. If I write my code, I want instantly, bam, there should be the suggestion. And I don't want to wait a single second, because it helps me whenever I don't think about it. And I don't want to type a word and then wait 5 seconds until a suggestion is printed. So I want the smallest possible model to get fast and actually pretty good, in my opinion, suggestions.
That actually brings up an interesting point. Why do I ask Daniel? Because I actually don't really use the inline auto-completion. I used it a little bit the other day and had a good experience, actually, but I've had a pretty bad experience with it. I find it's annoying. I'm just continually getting shown information that I don't want. It's information overload and it distracts me. So I turn it off. Whereas Daniel uses it and finds it helpful. And that's something we've found. Depending on the developer, different people have different experiences. And it's really about testing out the tools and seeing what works for you. There's no necessary right or wrong.
Right. We are not only using our IDE, we have other tools we use as a developer. And I think the tool we actually use most is the terminal. And I personally fell in love with a terminal called Warp, which tries to make working with the terminal better, have a better user experience. And a great feature they have is the integration of AI. So John will feed this terminal with a prompt, and he just needs to press the hashtag key.
That's right.
And then he can ask an AI.
Okay, so looks like you're out of request. I probably should have tested this beforehand. Doesn't matter. Look at that, isn't that interesting? I've used too many requests this month. Read a Kafka topic using because I used the AI a lot the other day.
And I think you can jump back to the slides.
I think that's a
have screenshots
good idea. Lucky we have screenshots. We prepared a few screenshots. The funny thing about that prompt is sometimes you get a good answer, sometimes you don't. You don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah, right. In here we see we say to consume a Kafka topic with a certain set of authentication and a specific output. And you can see on the output it provides on the bottom side that we have a long list of parameters. And of course, we could look up everything in the man page of Kafka CTL, but it's much faster to write down your command in natural language than it would be to look everything up.
In this case, Warp gives you a nice UX where you can tab through the parameters and give them in, so you don't have to give your password to the AI, you just tab it and type it in afterwards. Now, here's an example, we'll just skip over that, but this extremely complicated line up there actually basically wrote with AI, basically with integrating in a conversation, going back to the AI saying, I want this, I want that, and that gave me all the dependencies from a Gradle file, basically extracted the actual dependency names from a Gradle file.
A very important fact here is plausibility check, like you mentioned before. I just had it the other day. I had a nearly production incident because I produced a Kafka command which should produce a deletion marker, which is a message with the body, with a null body, so no body at all. And the output of the command produced a body with the string null. So not exactly what I expected, but I thought, yeah, the AI output this will be wise. And I executed it on the production environment. And then I realized, oh, that's not what I expected. And I called in our consumer teams. Hey, I may have done something wrong. Is everything right? And they said, we will look at it. And a few minutes later, they called back, yeah, our service crashes constantly and can't process this message. What can we do? And so we had a lot of work and actually a whole day we need to invest to remove this message or to help our teams to process such a thing called poison pill in Kafka.
All right. Now, Warp at the moment is free. You can see they've limited my request. I'm not paying for the thing. It's a beta, but at some point they'll want us to pay. Alternatively, you can use other solutions. Here's one that will use OpenAI for the request. You have to actually give an OpenAI key in. You can even pay that yourself if your company doesn't. I got away with under €1 per month, I think, by using that. So the AI, for command line prompts, which are pretty short, it's pretty cheap. Anyway, that's an option called Plus CLI, works similarly. And there are probably a bunch of other options out there too, which I haven't investigated. GitHub, if you're using Copilot, they offer something as well, and so forth.
Now, however, we have another problem. We have talked about cloud AI services so far, and we shouldn't send any customer data to cloud AI services, which is quite common sense. And we try to solve this issue by using local AI on our machine. However, there's another issue, John.
Well, the reason why our company banned AI was one, because of the data going out, but a second one is because there are general copyright issues, and not just the copyright issues you heard about. There's also the problem that anything an AI produces is, legally speaking, in the public domain. Gemeinfrei is called in German. And public domain, we as contractors, we sell our code. Every contract with the customer basically has a clause in it which says you can take this code, it's yours, you can do what you want with it, and you've got 100% rights to that, basically. You can't sell people rights to things which are in the public domain. It's just not possible. So you've actually got a problem if you're creating code with AI and selling that to someone and giving them rights on it. And any of you that are working as contractors will have a similar contract with the client. So that's a theoretical problem. And as an employee, you've also got the problem that you didn't actually do any work if you used an AI, because the AI did the work for you, and technically that's not working. And technically speaking, you can be, you're liable for, there's a law about that, at least in Germany. So there's a couple of weird things. And the question is, how do we deal with that? And our answer is basically, where nobody complains, they say in Germany, when nobody complains, there's no judge. And I think that one side, you can modify what comes out of the AI so that it's not completely public domain. You've actually done something to it. Often we have to do that anyway. And on the other side, I think that nobody's really going to be able to prove it. Very difficult to prove. And it's very difficult. And it's so far not actually been an issue. So we're waiting for legal cases to prove it. But that is an issue which you should be aware of, that is concerning companies, and companies with legal departments are bringing that issue.
And actually, it's not a new problem. The same applies if you use code from Stack Overflow. So if your whole code is based on Stack Overflow, you have had the exact same problem. And we've ignored it in the past as well.
Let's jump ahead, because this is a really important issue, is rethinking workflows. So what we're doing, we are actually not just saying, oh, cool, there's a tool, but we found you've got to help people to use AI. It's about a real mindset change. It's not enough to excite them with a talk like this. So we go into companies and use our people will then teach the mindset behind AI and saying, hey, what about, we call it AI first. What about using AI for this? What about using AI for that? So it's about how you use prompts. People sometimes have one bad experience, like Daniel said, and say, oh, don't like it because they don't really want it.
And that's really important to not get frustrated. Remember the first time you used Google. did you find what you was looking for? Probably not. And it's the same thing when you use AI. So maybe you need to prompt a few times until you get an output which you like. And so even if you are slower at the beginning, use it. It will worth it in the long run.
Yeah. It's funny things. It's really a weird thing. You can tell it not to hallucinate. Like, why doesn't it not hallucinate in the first place? I don't know, but you can tell it not to hallucinate, make up stuff that doesn't exist. But I also wanted to upgrade a pipeline to JDK 21, and the Copilot told me there is no JDK 21. And I said, well, imagine there was a JDK 21. And then it gave me a good answer. So, there's just crazy stuff that goes on. And also having a conversation is really important with the AI. The AI tells you something, then you give it an answer back, and then the conversation is also can lead you to good results. Okay, we don't really have time to go into all that stuff now.
It's called ChatGPT for a reason. So,
that's right.
Chat with it.
So you can also install a plugin in your browser, like I did on the right here, which automatically asks everything to ChatGPT. This is kind of funny because I'm asking it which words start with AR, and Google fails on the second one, and ChatGPT fails on the first one. But anyway,
I think you actually installed every plugin into your browser that has AI in the title.
It sort of reminds you to maybe use ChatGPT or something similar instead of Google. Or let me ask Google for you. This is in German. A colleague says, is there something in Eclipse like double shift as from IntelliJ? And I sort of send in my screenshot of when I asked the AI for them. It's like the good old days, let me ask Google for you. Now I have, let me ask an AI for you. And that's about spreading the mindset in the different ways.
Sorry for interruption. We have a couple of minutes left, so you may start wrapping up. We have a few questions.
No problem. I just got one last thing to say. This is really the conclusion, and that is we started with the premise, what happens if somebody comes along and wants to use AI in our coding interview?
And we would be more than happy if somebody uses it, because we have found out during our journey, it will be the state of it is actually the state of the art for coding. It will make us faster. And if an applicant comes to us and say, hey, I'm using the state of the art for programming, that's amazing. We want to see this actually.
So yeah, that's throwing that out to you out there, viewers. This is, we think, the way to go, and we hope that the talk and all these tools we've suggested can help you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was very interesting, and we have a couple of questions. Since we have 3 more minutes, I want to read that out. The first one is, have you tried JetBrains AI Assistant? Do you think GitHub Pilot is better or JetBrains AI Assistant?
I think that's something you can only answer today, and then next week it might be different. And when I tested JetBrains AI Assistant, I and a couple of colleagues did, we found it wasn't as good as we had hoped it would be at that time when it first came out. Now JetBrains has a second one where it all runs locally and no data gets sent, right?
I think we have two. We have the chat from JetBrains, which is the one you mentioned. I think it's a little less good than GitHub Copilot, but if this is your option, use it. It's still really good. And the other one is JetBrains also tries to include local AI features into their IDE, and they are a little less good than the tools we have tried.
All right, so I'll move on to the second question, which is, do you have any recommendations for any AI tool for Kafka commands?
Kafka commands?
Yes.
No, I don't.
I would say Warp AI is our choice, or Blizzle you have just mentioned, so a general purpose terminal tool, which will output you, hopefully, the right commands.
That's right. You can, if I generalize that question a bit, there are, you can train a local AI with documentation. One of the problems is that AIs are often out of date. A colleague of ours trained it with the latest Spring documentation, and then he got really up-to-date Spring answers. And he said it wasn't that hard to do. I haven't done it personally, but that's something you could do for Kafka or for another tool. If it's a fast-moving tool, you might want to try that out.
Mm-hmm. And our last question, one of our audience is asking about a tool, which is Perplexity.ai.
I don't know that tool, I have to confess. Do you know it, Daniel?
No, but there's a new tool coming out every day, so we can every tool. If it's interesting, we will have a look at it, but we can't say anything about it right now.
Yeah, that looks like a standard, I don't know. From what I can see, it's standard kind of AI chat tool. Yeah, really, there are a lot of them out there. I can't keep track of them all anymore, to be honest.
Yeah, it's not possible to track all every single tool. All right, gentlemen, it was very interesting and very beneficial. So thanks a lot for this talk and enjoy the rest of the conference.
You're welcome.
Thank you.